Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, to our event today. And I won't say anything more right now because, first of all, because this is a cooperation between the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, the Karl-Renner-Institut in Vienna, and the International Institute for Peace, we will have a short greeting from Doris Bures, the president of the Karl-Renner-Institut, before we will start the discussion on the panel. Please, it will be an input via video because unfortunately she can't be here. So if anyone can play it, I would be thankful.
Lieber Martin Schulz, liebe Freundinnen und Freunde, meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren. Vor 50 Jahren wurde die Schlussakte der Konferenz über Sicherheit und Zusammenarbeit in Europa, der KSZE, unterzeichnet. Der Abschluss eines politisch weitreichenden historischen Prozesses. Seit 1995 firmiert diese Organisation nun als OSZE mit heute 57 Teilnehmerstaaten. Ich kann heute auch deshalb nicht an eurer Tagung teilnehmen, weil ich an einer OSZE-Tagung in Rom bin. Mit der KSZE-Schlussakte 1975 wurde ein Verhandlungsprozess vorerst abgeschlossen, der einen Markstein der Entspannungspolitik zwischen Ost und West darstellte. Erstmals wurde der gemeinsame Wille zur Einhaltung sicherheitspolitischer Verpflichtungen, zur Wahrung von Menschenrechten und zur Zusammenarbeit in Wirtschaft und Wissenschaft sowie humanitären Fragen dokumentiert. Vorausgegangen sind dem jahrelange Verhandlungsrunden. Entscheidend war vor allem der Impuls durch die deutsche Ostpolitik der sozialdemokratischen Kanzler Willy Brandt und Helmut Schmidt. Sie haben durch ihre Politik der Ostverträge und der Politik des Wandels durch Annäherung diese historische Pforte geöffnet. Damit wurde, was vorerst gar nicht absehbar war, der eiserne Vorhang nach und nach löchrig. Die Menschenrechtsfrage und die Frage der internationalen Abrüstung rückte in den Vordergrund der politischen Debatte. Die KSZE-Schlussakte steht damit für eine historische Phase, in der Frieden und Sicherheit auf Basis von Dialog und Diplomatie erreicht wurde. Die Auseinandersetzung mit den damaligen kommunistischen Diktaturen verzichtete dabei auf moralisierende Dogmatik und setzte vielmehr auf eine pragmatische Politik der kleinen Schritte. Und sie führte schließlich durch Geduld und Nachhaltigkeit zum Erfolg. Der Fall des Eisernen Vorhangs ist ohne den Helsinki-Prozess nicht vorstellbar. Wir sollten das 50-Jahre-Jubiläum der KSZE dazu nutzen, uns dieser Tugenden wieder zu besinnen, wenn es darum geht, in Europa wieder eine Phase des Friedens und des Dialogs zu eröffnen. Für eure Konferenz und die komplexen Bemühungen, den Spirit of Helsinki zu aktualisieren, wünsche ich euch von ganzem Herzen jedenfalls viel Erfolg.
Vielen Dank. Thank you very much. Für diejenigen, die das Englische nicht verstehen, wir haben Übersetzung. Wir werden die Diskussion auf Englisch/Deutsch führen, je nachdem, wer wie sprechen möchte. Wir haben da hinten die Übersetzungsgeräte. So back again into English. Thanks again for joining us for a panel on 50 years of Helsinki Final Act and the very imminent question of European security in the future. We gave it a quite gloomy title, Old Treaties, New Wars. Has the European security model failed? But I hope that you will leave the room not in despair, but with a glimmer of hope, at least, towards our security in Europe. At a time of growing tensions and declining confidence in Europe, there is a huge question. How can the principles of the Helsinki Final Act be reaffirmed, reinterpreted, or newly created for the 21st century? We're in a different time now. We're 50 years after that. Can the OSCE be a platform? Can it be an actor for European security in the future? Right now it seems to be in a deadlock, blocked by various different actors. So we have a wonderful panel to look into these questions, and we won't have any long input statements, but just a conversation amongst us for like 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll open the floor to questions from your side. And I'm joined here in alphabetical order by Petra Bayr, member of the National Council of the SPÖ. So. Okay. That was the one failure I was allowed to make today. Member of the National Council of the SPÖ, a proud social democrat and an MP. Ireneusz Bil, chairman of the Amicus Europae Foundation in Warsaw. James C. O'Brien, a diplomat and former US Assistant Secretary of State for European and Eurasian Affairs until the inauguration of Donald Trump. And last but not least, Martin Schulz, president of the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, former president of the European Parliament and the German Social Democratic Party. And he's my boss, so he will be getting the hardest questions. But I'll start with James, because what we're doing today here in the evening is the continuation of a workshop we had in the morning with experts on what can we learn from the Helsinki Final Act and how can we kind of recreate or create something like that today. And one of the messages that came out of this workshop was, do not despair. So the question will be a bit more differentiated. The Helsinki Final Act was negotiated in the middle of the Cold War, in a period where there was no trust and there were two heavily armed blocs against each other. Which lessons can we draw from this process for the challenges we face today, James? And there's...
Thank you all very much. It's very much like an American to arrive late and begin speaking immediately. But I was asked. My overall interest, and I'm spending a fair bit of time in Europe now, is to look at what of the, say, post-1945 settlements, because there are many of them, what of that may survive this onslaught, and then what do we need to build going forward? I believe that the interests that brought us together over the past 80 years remain powerful and relevant. But we need to create a set of practices that will respond to the problems as our people see them today, with the kind of anger and despair and feeling that they have been left behind. And so the challenge on all of us who care about international politics is, how do we begin to work together? And I think the answer begins in Europe, as my own country works its way through the initial phase of this second Trump administration and on. And why do I think it starts in Europe? Because there's still a recognition here of the importance of working together. And there's the opportunity to begin to say, what are the terms on which we can work together in the future? Now, does the OSCE have a part to play in that? It does, but I think it's important for us to talk about the issues it should address and not simply plead for a recognition that the OSCE has a glorious, past. And so what are the things I think, and I believe there are a number of topics where we would reinvent something like the OSCE if we didn't already have it. I also think there's an enormous reservoir of goodwill in the international community toward having a place where governments that are fundamentally adversarial do sit down together. The last 2 years, I had the honor of sitting and representing the U.S. for a large part of the plenary session, the ministerial at the OSCE. And I listened as virtually every member state began an intervention by saying, the organization is stuck, it doesn't work, we don't know why we're here. But the point was they all were there. And they were all looking for some way to engage with each other, because it's the only place where they have that opportunity. So what are the issues on which we can rebuild some of the potency that the OSCE had? And I'll just mention a couple of topics. And I think one is around the area of tension reduction, transparency, arms control. When, as part of my responsibility, I was preparing for possible ceasefires or peace agreements between Armenia and Azerbaijan, possibly even Ukraine and Russia. And as I looked at many of the tools that we would need to have sustained peace, they were tools that the OSCE has developed over the years, and I'm sure many of you in the room here have worked on those. A second kind of area is in the support for elections and for the political expression that goes into elections. So it's the work of a couple of the specialized agencies and rapporteurs. I think here it's very important that those of us who support those efforts not dilute them by reaching agreements with authoritarian governments to weaken them. And it may be that there's room for some kind of political understanding between, say, I'll call them the like-minded and the more adversarially minded, to move forward on those two fronts, each one having to acknowledge the legitimacy of the other side's concerns in a way that we have not done for some time. The nature of that discussion is going to take a lot of time, and that's one of the lessons from the history of the OSCE, that it does take time and the agreements don't come easily. As well, the OSCE needs to stay in its lane and not take on other ones. I'm going to close with just one other point where I feel that the OSCE, the Helsinki Final Act, the Declaration of Principles is very important. We are facing in a number of countries, including the one I know best, an effort to make elected governments into personal governments. And this is a revolution against institutions and the rule of law. The Helsinki Accords and the OSCE, I think, need to stand not only for the idea that there are political and civil rights, but that we must have institutions that provide checks on the use of power when that power would infringe on those civil rights. Because I fear that what we see in a number of European countries and in my own is again an effort to weaken the checks and balances. And that's the whole third basket, but the entire kind of focus of many of the would-be authoritarians or populist or nativist leaders. And I think there is room here for the lessons of the OSCE and the way it empowered citizen groups and stood up for the intermediary organizations that mean so much to a healthy democracy: universities, civil society, non-governmental groups, law firms, etc. And I'd hope we could have a real focus on that as we head into the next 50 years of the OSCE.
Thank you very much. And I think we'll look into these challenges posed by the current personalistic direction we see in many governments a little bit after. But I want to go to Martin and ask you about something we had discussed today during some of our meetings. You described an atmosphere of fear and anxiety amongst citizens about security. And looking 50 years back, people tend to be nostalgic. Things seem to be kind of happy, ideologically cohesive, and we came together. But you were very young at that time. How do you see this coming together? Is that something we can learn from today?
This is difficult to answer to your question, because starting with this feeling of fear, which I'm confronted with every day in my constituency, discussing with people across beyond generations. If I listen carefully to what they tell me, there is behind everything fear. The older people are fearing war, but easy. They are asking me, do you believe that the Russians attack us? And my son is 20 years old. Do you believe that he has to serve in the army? Or why should I defend the Baltic states? I have nothing to do with them. Behind all these things is fear. Younger people tell me there's no future for us. Sooner or later we will have a war. I take what I can take today. And if I will not get it, I will take it. Behind this is a lot of aggression. I limit it to these two examples. There's a lot of other things. People fear to be poor when they are older, no pension, not security for health care, all this, you know, that's kind of stuff. But behind all these messages I get is fear. And this feeling of fear is linked to a mistrust to the capacity of public institutions to protect them, or to answer, to address their fears by concrete solutions for all the things they fear. If they ask me, are you sure that my son will not go to the Baltic states to defend them against a Russian attack? I can, to be honest, tell him I don't believe it, but I cannot give you a guarantee. And this is the difference to my generation. We were relatively certain, because of the 70th of the last century, that there is a structure, there are different structures, the United Nations, the European Union, NATO, the OSCE, assuring that there is perhaps always a risk of war, but it is very unlikely that it will happen. Or let's be honest, it is more or less impossible. And I have to add, those citizens of the European Union who lived in member states and founding states of the European Union, like Germany, like France, like Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, they were absolutely sure that war is unthinkable in Europe. My generation grew up, my constituency is in the triangle between Maastricht in the Netherlands, Liège in Belgium, and Aachen in Germany. This is a smaller area than Vienna, and if I walk from my house, I don't know if I'm still in Germany or I left already the Netherlands for Belgium. I grew up in an atmosphere where it was unthinkable that countries like Germany and France, who 80 years ago were finishing a drama, a disaster, terrible crimes committed by the Germans in France, nevertheless, unthinkable that a war between France and Germany is feasible today. If you go in Berlin out to the streets and ask somebody, should we attack the French, he calls for a doctor. And if you do in Paris the same, you have the same reaction, unthinkable. So what we are learning for today is all these certainties, also for my generation, all for other people, are not longer existing. We are living in a very uncertain world. And there is a feeling there is nothing like it was before. And let's be honest, this disruptive policy of Trump is confirming that feeling, is supporting that feeling. Nothing is as it was in the past. Nothing is sure. Everything could happen. And in addition to this, there is one thing worrying me a lot, more than all the other things. Those people who are exploiting that feeling of fear, who are feeding that fear, upheating the fear, have politically the most profit. And therefore, I get back to what I said. Nobody can give a guarantee that nothing will happen. And we Democrats, Social Democrats, Conservatives, Liberals, telling to the people, honestly, I can't give you a guarantee that nothing will happen in the future, is, in relation to this right-wing and sometimes also left-wing extremist, the proof, the evidence that these people are unable to solve the problems. The system can't give you any guarantee anymore. This is destroying trust to democratic institutions, and you mentioned this personalized leadership. And in all this, in that frame, we are facing a development where those who discuss like we do it today, people who go to a seminar like you organized it today, people sitting here in the room, looking to serious media, reading newspapers, used to describe advantages and risks and to balance and to analyze and to assess are called in the United States of America by the highest executive fake news media. And those who lie and tell lies are considered as truth social. For me, for example, the attacks on the universities in the United States is logic in that regard, because science must stick to truth. But those who are living by lies can't accept institutions based on truth. If these people will achieve, we will lose. Therefore, an order based on mutual respect, dignity, tolerance, leading to dialogue beyond different opinions, beyond different political systems, are needed more than ever. In the OSCE, and that was the idea of the OSCE, is one of these institutions. Therefore, 50 years later, my feeling is, even if there is a lot of problems within, even if people are telling they are stuck by what reason ever, multilateral institutions based on the principle of mutual respect, tolerance, beyond different opinions, strategies, and systems are needed more than ever. And therefore, I think there is a good reason to be together and to underline that we need the OSCE 50 years after the signing of the Helsinki Act.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I'm taking this up and giving a hard question to Ireneusz Bil from Poland, because after the Russian attack on Ukraine in 2022, the Polish chairmanship of the OSCE said, no business as usual, there is no dialogue with Russia. So nearly no European ambassador at the OSCE talks to the Russian delegation anymore. I say nearly because I don't know what the Hungarians are doing. So should there be a dialogue? Can there be a dialogue? And what for? Because what Martin said, there needs to be mutual respect, or at least mutual recognition of the differences. Can there be a dialogue, and should there be one?
Thank you very much, Christos, and grüß Gott to everyone. It's very good to be back in the beautiful city of Vienna. And I think your questions refers very good to the first one that you proposed to James, because one of the lessons learned from the Helsinki-Process is particularly about dialogue. Because I do not share the same approach of the Polish OSCE chairmanship, which was of the Law and Justice Party then, back in 2022. Because I think one of the lessons learned is about dialogue. The dialogue is possible even in the darkest of times, even if in the deepest of conflict. And we shall not see dialogue as we shall emphasize it's not endorsement. It's not endorsement of Putin. It's not endorsement of Russia is doing in Ukraine, but it's rather a strategic necessity of talking to them. In the end, if we will be able to strike a peace deal with Russia in the end, I don't know whether with Putin it's feasible, but in Russia certainly, we strike peace deals with enemies and not with friends. And because of that, we have to keep that kind of dialogue. And I think dialogue is also a tool of statecraft. We spoke today a lot about tools. What kind of tools does the OSCE propose? They have a lot of tools. We mentioned elections, for example, overseeing and controlling. But one of the tools is also diplomacy. So one of the big heritage of this 50 years is about the importance of dialogue. And I would emphasize that in a structural way, we shall be able to carry out such a dialogue with Russia. But of course, dialogue, it's difficult without trust. And certainly, today, no unconditional trust is out of the question with Russia, with Putin, who is lying to us, who was lying to us before 2022, saying that there will be no war, it's just our imagination. We know that this is totally not true. But another lesson from Helsinki, well, we had the same situation then, back in the 70s. But nevertheless, we were able to rebuild this trust. But the lesson is, it is possible usually only step by step. It will not be possible that from one day another we will be able to build trust, to reconcile, to start reconciliation. I remember, I think it was a year ago, a discussion in Kiev of the Yalta European strategy. And I think it was Wolfgang Ischinger, the former head of the Munich Security Conference, who rose up and, giving the example of Germany and Western Europe, said to the Ukrainians that you should be already thinking about reconciliations with the Russians. And there was a very hefty reactions, not only from the Ukrainians, but also from other Europeans, saying, come on, come on. Before we engaged in reconciliation of Germany, there was denazification. There was the Germans have attributed to the crimes that they did. So there was some kind of soul-searching and consciousness. We do not see that on the side of Russia. So we cannot speak about a truthful reconciliation before such a soul-searching will be taken place in Russia. So small steps are possible. And I think what combines both trust and dialogue is the example of the Istanbul talks now, because, well, Istanbul, of course, there was a huge, well, we can say disappointment, especially from the point of view of the American president, but I think there were some results. There was an exchange of prisoners, quite a lot of them, 6,000, I think. So some small steps were done. And maybe these are small steps, but anyway, this is also how Helsinki started. Because we building up all small steps, we can somehow rebuild the trust. And the last point about the lessons learned and the attitude is about legitimacy and multilateralism. Because when we look at the whole process, well, it was not only a dialogue between the big, but United States and the Soviet Union. It was also involving all of the small and medium-sized states. But that all of these countries endorsed the final act meant that this had a very broad legitimacy. And I think this is an important point for today, when again, Russia, but also the American president, won't go to bilateral deals and make some transactions. I think we, as small and medium states, and I think it was Paul-Henri Spaak, the former prime minister, socialist of Belgium, who said that Europe consists only of small states, and those of them who have not recognized this fact yet. So I think all of us, especially when we compare today ourselves to not even to the United States, but to India and to China, we are small and medium-sized states. And it's in our interest that the deal that we will be having in the future also has this legitimacy, not only of the big ones, but also of all of us in Europe.
Thank you very much. That gives me the ideal opportunity to come to a very big state diplomatically, Austria, and asking Penny, we heard now Ireneusz talking about dialogue and the small steps need to be taken. We heard also Martin describing fears and anxieties of people. Are there any other steps we can do to help kind of stabilize the current situation? And what can smaller states, non-aligned states like Austria do here? Because there was this wonderful quote by Alexander Stubb at the Munich Security Conference where he said we have a choice between the Yalta moment and the Helsinki moment. A Yalta moment meaning the big guys are sitting on a table and decides what the rest of us do, and Helsinki moment meaning that we all together, smaller states, not so small states, and maybe also some bigger states sitting together and deciding for us together. So what can smaller states like Austria do here to stabilize the situation?
Let me start by getting back what Martin told about fear, because it's not only these effects which you described. We also see, for instance, that many of those countries who ratified the Ottawa Convention and are against landmines and for the ban of landmines, now, of course, has to give an answer to the fear of the people. And very often those who have a common front line with Russia, or not a front line, a common border with Russia, say, okay, we will leave Ottawa because we have to protect our borders. And so that's also a huge impact on multilateralism, on things we already gained. We did very hard, as Europe, we tried very hard to convince the Global South also to ratify treaties like that, also when it comes to nuclear treaties, for instance. And if now European Union, by the way, states say, okay, we should leave that, and it's Finland, it's the Baltic states, it's Poland, and it's to some degree understandable why they do that, because they have to give an answer to their people, how to protect them. But of course, that's also an eruption of the multilateral, another eruption of the multilateral system that we already have seen before. So for Austria, I think, of course, we don't do that at the moment. And as you mentioned, Istanbul, it shows that Turkey, as a country with own interests in this conflict, manages to gain some treaties, also the Crane Treaty, for instance, which was done there. So I think that as a neutral state, we should have even more possibilities to provide space, to provide also secured space for possible talks. Which of course would also mean that we invest in this space, because it's not only to provide a hotel or whatever, it's of course also to provide people who are able to mediate, to provide diplomats who are educated to hold this kind of mediation dialogues. And there, of course, we have our budget constraints that we see at the moment. So I don't have a lot of hope, but nevertheless, as neutral country, I think we really should offer us and play a role. Plus, when it comes to the OSCE in particular, as far as I know, Vienna will hold the ministerial conference in December 25. So we will have the ministers then there. And of course, depending on what's the situation of the Russian war of aggression in Ukraine at this time, of course, there could be initiated very important steps, hopefully, really to develop forward. So I think at the moment, but it's not only us as Austria, it's also us as European Union, of course, we should put real pressure on Russia for a 30-day ceasefire, for instance, really to have the chance to start negotiations on a level playing field as far as possible. And I think if Austria only would search for a productive role, we could find it, but we will have to invest in that. It doesn't come by a good name or by neutrality only.
Thank you very much, and I hope that the rumors are true that Austria is going to take on responsibility in the OSCE as a chairperson in 2027. But when we talk about dialogue and the very small steps taken here, and the even smaller and if any steps in trust building, there is a reality going on in many European states at the moment that is doing huge leaps. We're spending vast amounts of money on arms at the moment. Germans have loosened the debt brake to spend more on defense. There is talking about 800 billion euros spent in Europe on defense, and on the NATO summit we will probably have the 5% of GDP somewhere as a target. So this is a reality right now. We're basing our security order in Europe about deterrence. And James said that one of the issues we could delve into, because there is a common interest, could be arms control. Martin, this is something that is close to your heart, but how do you think we can make any progress when it comes to questions of, and I'm just saying arms control, not even disarmament, because that seems very far-fetched. And why should we do that? Because people are afraid. Aren't more weapons making us more secure?
I answer as a German social democrat. The idea of Helsinki and the Helsinki-Process was in a time of every year more spendings and investment in military, in armies, in military research, by the way, in that time also, the idea was security is a comprehensive idea. Security means not only to invest in weapons, it means also to invest in what we just mentioned, in dialogue, in mutual understanding, and in the attempt to limit at a certain moment the investments in weapons, to limit the production, to limit, because defining a common goal that we only invest until a very certain, very dangerous point, and that we should avoid to achieve, to touch on the point where it is too much. That was the idea during the 70s of the last century. The question you raise is quite easy to answer. We are in a similar situation. Sooner or later, weapons who are produced will be used. So let's follow the idea. Where are the moments, where are the levels, where are the people we need to discuss what is the point of no return? Where is the point of no return? And what can we do to avoid, to touch on, or to get to the point of no return? This is linked to a lot of questions just raised, for example, by Ireneusz. Is it possible to, is a dialogue possible with Putin? This is a war criminal. When Alexander Stubb mentioned the point of Yalta or Helsinki, Yalta was a negotiation with a war criminal. A very bloody one. But Helsinki, let's be honest, okay, Brezhnev was not Stalin, but Brezhnev was for sure not a Democrat. And the government of Poland in that time was a bloody communist dictatorship. And my country was divided. I was just visiting the German ambassador to the OSCE, and there is this very famous, iconic photography of my youth. In the first row of Helsinki was sitting Helmut Schmidt on one side as German Federal Chancellor, on the other side Erich Honecker as the Secretary General of the Communist Party of Eastern Germany, and they are across the floor speaking to each other. Very famous photography, but they spoke. And therefore I think we are living in a different time. A lot of things changed enormously. But the need to check what can we do to limit? What can we do to start at the end of dialogue has one additional precondition. We must make a decision. And we'll get back to what Ireneusz said. The Europeans are asking to sit on the table for negotiations. Well justified. If we want to avoid that an American president and a Russian president are like Yalta, dividing the world as they want to do it, and perhaps to another point, an American president with Xi Jinping. If the Europeans, well justified, want to sit at the table, and not in 10 years but now, then the decision is to sit at the table with this war criminal. So that means for me we are perhaps in a situation where we are in a Yalta and in a Helsinki moment in the same time. Therefore my answer to your question is whatever we can do to contribute to the military necessary measures, civilian diplomatic initiatives. We have to do it. This is unavoidable.
Thank you very much. James, coming to you, the question is, if we're starting this dialogue, and we've heard a lot of reasons for that, why should Russia engage in something like that? We have this report outside the security radar we publish every year, and there also the Russian leadership can read that Europeans are afraid of spending too much on defense, and that will be kind of cut from the social expenditure. They want to spend more on social affairs. So why don't just kind of get into an arms race with these feeble democracies? Why should Russia engage? Is there any mutual interest? That was the idea of Helsinki, that there are mutual interests, that security is indivisible. Is that still the case? Do you believe that there is there are points of access?
Not yet. I think President Putin has hardened. For whatever reason, he set off down a path of believing that Russia's security is indivisible from its control over many of its neighbors. And that hardened during COVID when few people saw him. And now Russian diplomats or others I might have engaged at times over my career are reluctant to speak because they don't think they will have backing from the top. So how do we get out of this moment? To my mind, and I have a couple of slightly disjointed suggestions and maybe one practical one, but to my mind, Yalta was a fake negotiation between one power in Moscow that already controlled the territory it was pretending to negotiating about, and distracted and, as it turned out, terminally ill American president with Winston Churchill at the very end of his time. So the way that we distinguish today from Yalta to begin with is to make sure that the power from Moscow does not have the military option to simply dictate the results that he wants. Now, I agree with Martin that we absolutely must take steps that while we are in the period of building up this defense capability, that we avoid having it be seen as inflammatory or risking additional risks of accidental warfare. And here, there are some things the OSCE can do and some it cannot. And part of the genius of the Helsinki process was that the OSCE did not try to become the answer to every issue, but it did a few things. And especially around conventional arms, there were some limitations, but perhaps more important were mechanisms to ensure transparency and familiarity and awareness of how the others were using their militaries. I think the other, and I'll just offer two additional thoughts. Another point here is a change from the Helsinki period. So I mentioned the way we need to change away from Yalta. A change from the moment of Helsinki is that the very notion of collective security is still used as a phrase, but it means very different things to Russians and to us. To them, it means they must have control over the states they believe can influence the security of Russia itself. That starts with Ukraine now, but lives somewhere in some unclear border territory further along. And we need to see whether it is possible, with dialogue, over time, to find some other definition of collective security, something the Russians might be willing to accept. At the moment, I don't believe it's possible. It's possible that if we begin to engage with China more, China with the unending friendship with Russia, that it may be in a place to offer Russia some assurance that it will help make sure that Russia will not be set upon by the West. I don't know. At the moment, that's also an unacceptable outcome to Russia because it doesn't want to be beholden to any other power. But that's an area where there might be some interesting room for intellectual work. My final point is just, we have been in moments like this before. So I remember the 70s not as a happy time of nostalgia, but as a moment of a fall from grace for the United States. 30 years after the end of World War II, it was when, because of the oil shock, our aging industries were beginning to fall apart. We had Japan and Germany surpassing us by many economic indicators. And then for us, it was a time of real security threats. I got jealous listening to Martin's description that Europeans felt sure there would be no war. In the United States, there was constant talk of war, whether it was in Central America or proxy wars in Africa. The Cold War was a horribly violent time. The fear of nuclear war, all of these things were part and parcel of my growing up in that 70s and 80s period. So I don't look at it as a moment that we necessarily want to reclaim. I look at it as a moment when we stared down real problems and we found a solution. And one of those problems was the reluctance of our own people to stand up for themselves. After Vietnam and after Watergate, 40% of Americans said they didn't want to honor Article 5. We've been in this place, and the difference is some decent political leadership. Not leadership that says to people, I will be your megaphone, that what makes you angry, I will be angrier at. But someone who says, we work together in the most difficult of times and we begin to find a path forward. The OSCE can be a piece of the answer on some of the security issues. The rest of the challenge is to help people feel that their lives are valued and their kids have some opportunity around the economic developments that are to come in AI, energy, biomedicine, etc. That's the task of the political leaders. And that we've done before. So I believe we can start working on it and we will come out the other side, because Helsinki wasn't just a few weeks in 1975. It was the culmination of a process that began maybe a dozen or more years before. So let's get working.
Thank you very much. Decent political leadership, that's something to be held on to. And I wanted to go with Ireneusz and Penny in a different direction now, away from Russia, and because we're talking about the OSCE, we're talking about Helsinki, and what Helsinki also brought about was kind of focus on civil society, on human rights, on freedom of speech. It opened a window to the east of Europe, and it started a kind of cultural and political diffusion. And we're faced with similar problems at home right now. We have elections in Europe with very problematic outcomes for our democratic stability. We see the developments in the United States. So getting a bit away from the OSCE, what can we do to kind of stabilize these developments and make sure that we produce, as James said, what we need, decent political leadership? And I'll start with you, Penny.
Of course, today's battlefields are much more complex, hybrid wars, and when we see what huge influence, sorry, I'm at Russia again, Russia takes on election campaigns in Moldova, for instance, or elsewhere, it's really frightening. And to come to this point of civil society and human rights, I'm not active in the parliamentary settings of the OSCE, but at the Council of Europe. And there we opened about a year ago an office for a country which is not member of the Council of Europe. It is Belarus, because we are in dialogue with the elected opposition of Belarus, and we also, of course, are in dialogue with they don't call themselves opposition, they call themselves resistance, because opposition would be a wrong picture, with the resistance of Russia in living in a diaspora, because it would be much too dangerous for people living in Russia to be in contact with them at the moment. And that, of course, is on the one hand, as we are sure there will be a post-Lukashenko and a post-Putin era. And we will need forces, we will need people, we will need politicians and civil society that have an idea about democratic values, about rule of law, about democracy, about human rights, of course, and to know them already now and to try to have a dialogue on what could be the best way forward to re-establish or establish, as you would like to see it, these values and these systems is, of course, an asset for us if we already know whom to talk with. And I think that that was maybe one of the most impactful results of Helsinki and of OSCE to give visibility for those in former Soviet Union bloc countries, or Eastern Bloc countries, to have an idea who these people in Poland, for instance, are. They had names, they had faces, they had a story, and I think that's also very important to give hope to others, to have a dialogue with them. And let me also stress one last thought about that. I think which is totally important to all that is the role of free and independent media. And of course, we are lacking that in many settings. And for me, it's really a lot of that what Trump and his administration is doing is frightening. But to, for instance, freeze totally the funds for Radio Free Europe, where we know that's a medium, and it's not only radio anymore, it's multiple diverse media which Radio Free Europe is using in, if I am not mistaken, in 42 languages in 27 countries, also in Iran, in China, not only Europe. We had a debate with my Ukrainian colleagues recently on the role of Radio Free Europe, and those who also witnessed the Cold War in Ukraine said that was every evening. It was a hope. It was you heard about what's going on in the world, what's reality, what's the different narrative, what's the alternative at the very end, yeah? And to take away this hope by freezing all the funds. And if I remember right, it's 27 million US dollars. And it's fine that the European Commission now gives 5.5 million euros, but that's not enough. So we really have to also have a very close look on how to support free and independent media to give people voices and ideas and freedom of thoughts, of expression. Of course, it's one of the core human rights.
Thank you very much. But times are different, Ireneusz. It's not anymore the clear block between East and West. It's the difficult countries like Hungary, they're amongst us. So we have these political forces inside our country. So how can we give hope that there will be we talk about a European security model, but we also should think about a European society model that is kind of decent, that gives chances to people that they strive also to defend. How can we kind of strengthen that from your point of view?
Well, Helsinki was unique in that respect that for the first time, through the first two baskets, it dealt, of course, through the relations between the states. But the third basket was very innovative because it dealt with situations within the states. And of course, then when the Soviet Union collapsed after 1991, we know everybody was convinced that this is the end of the history, that democracy has won, and glorious times are ahead of us. I remember in the year 2000, during a Democratic administration in the US of President Clinton, an organization was established named the Community of Democracies, exactly, Community of Democracies. The idea was that we, democratic states, are to use this unique momentum in the history to promote and strengthen democracies all around. Of course, it was a time of hope. We had the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. We had colorful revolutions in north of Africa. But in the couple of years, it turned out that we are getting into a deeper and deeper crisis. And then, of course, also the IT revolution, the digital revolution came with new threats to democracy. And now we are in a unique situation that we are not speaking about promoting democracy abroad. In the former Soviet Union, in North Africa, we are rather speaking about strengthening democracy at home. We have coined such a phrase of the resilience of democracy, that how resilient a democracy is. Martin was speaking very eloquently about the fear. And the fear is a very powerful political force. And you described very well a beautiful German word, Zeitgeist, of today. And we have a lot of fear, which is not only about the Russian invasion, but really about the condition of our democracy. About that people are fearing about the future of their kids, about the inequalities. And this is what dictates political behavior. As you know, we had on Sunday presidential elections in Poland. And the issue of Russia was an important issue, but it was not prevailing one. More, it was emotions about among dividing the people, that one side of that was seeing policy as a zero-sum game, trying to convince that only they provide for the true virtues and the true solutions for all the problems. And the other side was arguing differently, that we have to be open, we have to build, overcome the polarization. But this, let's say, positive attitude has lost. And why? Because of this fear. And I think if we look at the OSCE gives us a lot of powerful tools. We've been speaking about this today, about, for example, elections, how to control elections, how to support all the parties, also the oppositions within our group of countries in just and fair elections. But also, I think it can support us in a way which I think national also governments and parliaments cannot do, namely somehow coping with the challenge of this digital revolution and digital challenges. This election campaign in Poland was unique. For the first time, the majority of arts, of even political debates, was not held on public media, public radio. No, they were held on the internet, on YouTube channels, on TV channels which were only screening on YouTube, on the internet, on Facebook and TikTok. Also, the majority of paid, probably from abroad, political ads were also done on the internet. So we really, our societies are not able still to control it, to cope with it. And I think if we are speaking about a new spirit for new opportunities for OSCE, I think we should emphasize today, even no less than it was in the 70s, that not only the first two baskets are important, but the third is important, but this time for us, not only for them.
Thank you very much, Ireneusz. And with that, we touched a lot of issues. We touched Russia and the dialogue with Russia. We touched about security and the anxiety of people. But we touched also the issues that we at home have to take care of, the challenges we face with personalistic policies, AI, and so on and so forth. I'd like to open the floor to your questions, but just two small rules. First, questions. No lectures. I'll cut you off if you talk too long. And second, please state your name, maybe your institution you're coming from, and if there's a person on the panel you'd like to ask directly, please name him or her. And I'll start with the gentleman with the hand back there.
My name is Günther Fehling. I'm a development consultant. My question is to Mr. James O'Brien. You know, about the membership in OSZE, because Russia is now waging already 11-year basically war in Europe and breaking all the rules, and it's still a member of OSZE. And Kosovo, which we have created, basically supported and recognized, is still not a member. So can you explain the rationale of the American government, especially in the light that we in the Council of Europe have excluded Russia already? Thanks.
Thank you very much. Then we have a gentleman in the second row here. Just wait for the micro, please.
OSZE has started with talking with each other with consensus solutions. 10 years ago, the Western Bloc changed this. They go to voting solutions and not to talking with everyone. The first time was very successful, you said it, fall of the Iron Curtain. But now they don't talk anyone. And therefore, will you do anything that OSZE comes back to the roots and will talk with everyone and also try to find consensus solutions and not voting solutions anymore?
Thank you very much. And we'll take a third question back there. Gentleman in the yellow shirt.
Peter Bayr from the Austrian Peace Movement. I just wonder, everybody agrees that we need more dialogue, and I just wonder, where have the diplomats gone? I think in Helsinki the situation might be difficult as well, but where are now our diplomats to try to get at least talks? We had several OSZE meetings where the opponents left the room and the other talks. So this is not a real possibility for dialogue. And Mrs. Bayr mentioned that the foreign conference will be in Vienna in December. It is a little advancement because the Finnish presidency said they don't want to execute it because they don't allow Russians to come in. So at least they can take part. But then I asked the Austrian foreign minister, what can you do? Can you insert a peace initiative? And they said no, because the Finnish will have the order of the schedule. So I just asking, the distrust you mentioned is, for me, regarding the politicians. Why do they not find a dialogue base?
Thank you. Thank you very much. There's an issue with the microphone at the moment, I think. I just talked louder. So we had three questions. First to James on Russian membership in OSCE. Then can we go back to the consensus solution? And then where have all the diplomats gone? And I would add to that, because diplomats means track 2 dialogue. But there's also no track 1 dialogue, sorry. And there's also no track 2 dialogue. We've cut nearly everything, no university exchanges and things and so on with Russia. So where have all the diplomats and the kind of stakeholders gone? And we'll start with you, James, and then we'll go from right to left. And I think you need to talk now because the microphone is it working? Now it will sound like I'm shouting.
So the question of membership in the OSCE. We need some place people are together. This is the only organization where, say, Russia, Azerbaijan, a set of Central Asian countries as well, sit around the table with the other European states, the only European organization. Kosovo should be a member. That's our position, the U.S. position. I guess I can't say our at the moment because I know but aside from the institutions, there's a question of what is it we're going to talk to one another about. And maybe I'll lead into the question of where all the diplomats have gone. I think the difficulty at the moment is that there's too much identification between the power structures in each society and those who speak for the government. And it's reduced the amount of space. So you can't go, I have a lot of Russian friends. They now live in Berlin and Copenhagen and the United States. The kinds of people who would have begun to generate ideas that would have filtered back up into the formal channels. At the moment, they're sorting outside their countries. I'm now here in Vienna for most of this year while I try to sort out what I think the U.S. can do. And I think that's part of the reason the dialogue is so slow to begin, because you have, frankly, in Moscow, I fear in my country that officials are much less willing to have wide-ranging discussions about what might be possible, because they are being told you must read from a set of talking points that have been approved by a small set of political thinkers. And that's been my experience trying to work with Russia until now, over the last several years. I think then the challenge, that doesn't seem any better, does it? It looks better. So, I think that the challenge in front of us is much like in our own domestic politics, certainly in Poland, in my country, Austria going through a set of tightly contested elections. Congrats to Germany. We spend our time talking about the issue, about a small set of issues on which we are deeply divided. And the same thing is true within the OSCE. At the moment, the set of issues that come up for consideration are ones on which sides have deeply felt, strongly held views that are very unlikely to change. The task for the intellectuals, for the Track 2 people, and ultimately for the diplomats is to begin to find other issues that divide us somewhat differently. That existed in the 70s. And you had an opportunity there where a number, and one of our fellow panelists earlier today was Michael Augustine, I can't remember, used a great phrase. Part of the reason that the third basket was accepted by everyone was because the socialist side had the view that it could win the debate on how best to organize the human security of their population. Now, in my view, it was always a failure and it couldn't win, but it was willing to accept that as an area of contestation. And at the moment, we don't have those shared areas. So all electoral support programs are color revolutions to someone in Moscow. And for us, all Moscow-backed kind of security claims are infringements on the sovereignty of other countries that have chosen a different path. And until we begin to find another set of issues, I fear we're going to be stuck here, and the membership in the organization will matter less than the fact that the organization is unable to go forward. My one positive bit at the end of this is it is a reason that there's a Turkish Secretary General in the OSCE now, because that gave the organization someone able to work with Central Asians and Russians, as opposed to being just another organization, I say just, but another organization of the like-minded who would be seen as lecturing across. So we're maybe in a period of seeing what's left in the potential of the organization in its current alignment. Oh, I thought you were going to bring me a third microphone, but this is much more welcome. Okay. Why don't we do this? It looks quite good, but I'll hand over to Penny, Martin, ask them to give questions to you. And let's be short so we can have a last round of questions for the audience and then talk a little less loudly outside.
Okay. So I think I don't disclose, it's an advantage when you come from Favoriten, then you have a loud voice. I think I do not disclose the secret when I say that even within the Austrian...
So why is it
translation?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Okay. That even, it's for the translation, I think. However, that even within the Austrian parliament, it's harder to perform a dialogue with those who do not want to have a dialogue, and that's an intention, I would say. It's not by accident. There is no openness very often to find common solutions, so that makes it harder in the internal policy, and it makes it even harder on the international banquet. And as far as I know, the OECD even doesn't have a mechanism how to expel a country. That's simply not possible as far as I know. And indeed, it was mentioned, the Council of Europe expelled Russia. Now it's getting dark as well. expelled Russia from the Council of Europe. And that's, of course, a very tricky question because there are two different approaches. Of course, you can think that, and you can say that it's always better to sit at one table negotiating with somebody, but if this somebody is breaking all your fundamental... if this one country is breaking all your fundamental common values and common ideas you have, and at the Council of Europe we have the European Convention of Human Rights, and if we see that, and it's not only Russia we expelled after some who and hots, but of course we also have problems with many other countries. Now, when I think about Turkey, when I think about Georgia, when I think about Azerbaijan, if I think about Hungary, what's the best solution? Is the solution to expel them all and maybe to end up with Liechtenstein, Switzerland, and don't know, Iceland? Or is it better to say, okay, you respect that they are really breaking your values, that they ignore you, that they really infringe them in a very, very rude way, but nevertheless you keep the dialogue. And I'm not so sure what is the best answer. I tend to say there is a red line, and if you cross that red line, then you are maybe not anymore member in our family. For the Council of Europe, not for the OSCE. I think the OSCE would really be that would weaken it totally if we would take this approach.
Thank you very much. It's getting darker, but the dialogue is easier.
Yes, I'd like to jump where you finished, because I think it's a very important question. Should we talk to everyone? Because I think we agree that our strategy towards Russia failed. This strategy had different phases. We call it Wandel durch Annäherung, Wandel durch Handel, and also economic interdependence. So we were thinking building the economic ties, opening our borders for tourism, for mutual investments, for buying gas from Russia and selling them our cars. We will build some kind of this Verflechtung that will enable us somehow to stabilize Russia and to play by the norms. We know that, unfortunately, that has failed. And not only with Russia, but probably also with other autocracies. And the question is, what do we have instead of that? Because it's not only about talking, it's about strategies, what we want to achieve in a relation with autocracy. We know that probably because they have now alternative model where China is successful without a democracy. So they have an authoritarian regime and a functioning capitalistic economy. So there are many countries with authoritarian regimes who would rather prefer this kind of road than the democracy one, especially if the democracy in a crisis. So I think what we are now challenged, if we are asking whom should we speak to, we have to think another strategy, what we want to achieve in countries like Russia, for example. And I think, just last point, I think it's about common rules of behavior. If a country, even an authoritarian one, behaves to norms that should be mutually respected, we can talk to them, we can trade with them. But if a country decides to break these rules, to violate borders militarily and with hybrid warfare, I think this is a moment where we have to adopt a much stricter strategy versus them.
Thank you very much. So it's not so much about trust, but trust also in the process. I'll take 3 more questions, very short ones, please, to finish up. There was a gentleman back there with the glasses. Maybe there is not only gentlemen asking questions.
Thank you. My name is Max Haller. I'm a sociologist, University of Graz and Austrian Academy of Science. My question is, what do you understand all about the dialogue? I fear a little bit the concept of dialogue is not the right one now. I support very much. But maybe negotiations are now the possible dialogue. And here the main problem I see that the European Union or West European countries do not go into negotiation with Putin together with Zelensky. I was in Ukraine last year. I wrote a book about the war in Ukraine. If you go to Ukraine now, you don't see destroyed houses, but you see cemeteries in every town. Ukraine had 51 million inhabitants since 91, now has 38. Yeah. The war can go on for 10 years if it goes on. So I think the Western European countries, not the European Union, it's not unanimous, but France and Germany said already they would provide troops to make sure the safety. My question to Mr. Schulz is, would you support that Germany also supports troops to make safe Waffenstillstand in Ukraine and negotiations?
Thank you very much. Other questions over here?
Thank you very much. Gudrun Steinacker, former German diplomat. I want to come back to the question you pose in the title of this event. Has Europe's security model failed? If it has failed, so what could be a new security model? I think there were some elements in what you said which I could accept as an answer, but nevertheless, I would like to have your opinion. What could be a new security model for Europe under the present circumstances?
Thank you very much. And the last question is the lady in the fourth row on this side.
Thank you very much, Christine Hölke. My name is. My question is also related to the title. Has Europe's security model failed? The question is there another role for Europe? We've discussed that multilateralism is declining, that the big powers are taking unilateral actions. There was a short comment on a role of Turkey could play, but what about the EU? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wonderful questions, and we'll start with Ireneusz, and I think we have micros here working.
Working.
And make it short, make it 2 minutes so we have time for the less loud conversation outside with a glass of water and wine.
So, well, maybe a short comment to the negotiations. Of course, with Russia, what we are speaking about are negotiations. Because we are in a hot conflict. Ukraine is in a hot conflict. We are supporting Ukraine. This is an unjust war, so this is mainly during formal channels negotiations. But I think dialogue, I meant dialogue in a much deeper sense, and dialogue, of course, is an expression of mutual interest. Not only between politicians, diplomats, it's rather also between societies interested in knowing each other, the universities, think tanks, and other organizations. And we are, of course, we just spoke also today, we are not at this moment with Russia. Even, well, in the 70s at least, I think they were criminologists, specialists who specialized in Russia studies, were traveling to Russia, learning Russia. There were quite many of them in the United States and Europe. But today, if we look how many Russian specialists we have, I must tell you, even in Poland, it's a disaster because less and less people are interested in Russia, not even studying Russian. The borders are closed. They are not able to send even those who are interested for some kind of fact-finding mission. So I think if we want such a dialogue, it's still a long way to go. And one point about what security model, I think it will be hybrid or a multi-layered model because we will not think out a philosophical stone, a new institution, because destroying institutions is easy. Rebuilding them, it's a huge effort and a lot of time. So I think we have to build upon what we have. I think the whole discussion about OSCE 50 years is how we can use that capabilities of this organization, and there's room for everyone, for NATO, for a strengthened EU, but also for the OSCE and other similar organizations.
It works again. Yeah, I think that when I come back to the question of what's security role for Europe, or what structure for security for Europe, I think it will not be possible to have one single model or one single institution only. I think it must be a layered and somehow coherent architecture with several demands, I would say. First of all, and no, I do not think that Austria should join the NATO, just to make it clear at the beginning, no. But nevertheless, I think that the EU-NATO cooperation must be enforced and must be we must avoid duplications, and we must fit together our and I do not mean our NATO Austria, but the European Union equipment together with NATO, and that will develop somehow, then I think that Europe also have to build up on its more strategic role. I said it at the very beginning. I think we really need the competence, we need the knowledge, we need the resources to manage crises, to have better defense coordination, and to strengthen resilience, and finally, of course, we are at the beginning again, revitalize OSCE. Despite Russia is not constructive in that way, but also to take the question on dialogue, I think that for sure dialogue and negotiations is not the same, but a dialogue is a precondition for a negotiation that can be fruitful at the very end. I think without dialogue we won't reach anything.
We're unfortunate to be living in the age of old men who are in a hurry. Putin wants to get back to 1945. My own president wants to get his own golden statue, if not in Gaza, then in other places. So how do we begin to address that? And I think it's necessary that we allow the citizens of our countries to feel that they have some hope, that they have a place in the issues that are going to define the next few decades. So in 1945, the issue that consumed the post-war world was how to get rid of the wars that originated close to your district, right? About that very valuable stretch of territory. And that led us into the EU. It kept America in NATO. And it built this multi-layered set of security architecture that we have today. So what are similar issues that are coming forward? We have to weather the storm of the old men. Apologies to everyone my age and older in the audience. But there are really 4 areas that will define the prosperity and security of our people going forward. One is how we handle the issue of defense with all of the complexities within it. Biomedical advances, energy transition, and then the digital, the sort of AI revolution. If we can say to our people, we are going to work together to come up with a good future where these ideas are developed, produced, and put to use in a way that makes your lives better and meaningful, then we have a chance. We can approach those issues only if the United States, with Canada, Japan, Korea, and Europe work together. And right now, Europe is the most functional and the agency and the player with the most agency able to shape those areas. So that's the charge to Europe for right now, before the coalition rebuilds itself for the future.
When I was elected to the European Parliament as a very young member of the European Parliament, 30 years, more than 30 years ago, I had an advantage. There was nobody who was interested in the post of human rights spokesman. It was a very delicate thing, and all my colleagues. So I was the only one, and they said, this new one, nobody knew me in the European Parliament. This is okay. I said, if there is nobody who wants to be the spokesman on human rights, I was in the Human Rights Subcommittee. Okay, I accept the post. So I was a coordinator of the Socialist Group in the European Parliament for Human Rights from the first day of my election. So. Then I got a letter from the Iranian embassy. The human rights delegate of the Iranian embassy wanted to get an appointment with me. I was surprised. I said they have a human rights responsible. I refused. I said I will not speak with this people, with these terrorist regimes. I want to get no contact with them. And then the neighbor in on the floor in the European Parliament, the neighbor of the office neighbor, was the former French Prime Minister Michel Rocard. You remember him. And I'm French speaking. I went to school in France, and I was very close to him. And he said to me, this is a mistake. What you are doing is a mistake. I said, why? And he gave me a lesson I never forgot, and this is my answer to dialogue, to the question, should we dialogue? He said to me, if you want to save somebody sentenced to death, you must discuss with the hangman. Because this is the man who sooner or later decides about the victim. To refuse dialogue is wrong. At the end, we must discuss with everybody. This is for a private person, not mandatory. In my private life, I could say no. With such people, I will never get in touch. For a politician, it is inadmissible to refuse dialogue. This is the difference between political life and private life. In political life, I have to do the utmost and even the most unpopular things to avoid, and this is my answer to the question, should we send troops? No. I'm against. We should, whatever is possible, do to solve the problems via dialogue. And this is not excluded. But I repeat, whenever you discuss in political life with people who are starting war, who are committing war crimes, you must be sure that as a politician, at the end, you are obliged to speak to them, or you are lost. On which is concerning the reality in Ukraine, my feeling is we are very near to a Verdun moment. Both sides are in the situation neither to win nor to lose, but producing every day, especially the Russians, terrorism and victims. But if we want to avoid that this is continuously going ahead with enormous costs, with enormous victims, we have to look where are these small windows of opportunity. You said, in my eyes, you mentioned a very important point. It is not by chance that the new Secretary General of the OSCE is a Turkish diplomat, a former foreign minister. I think you may think about Erdogan whatever you want, and I had the advantage that I could tell openly to Erdogan that I completely disagree with whatever he is doing. As a president of the European Parliament, I had the chance to tell to him, Recep Tayyip, I disagree with you entirely. But if he can help us today to build a bridge between the Ukrainians and the Russians, he is the man of the moment. And to conclude, 20 years ago, after the failure of the European Constitution, within the Lisbon Treaty, we defined the common European security and defense policy as a known chapter. And already in 2005, 2006, it was perceivable, was tangible that the international military and diplomatic and economic strategies of the United States of America, not led by Trump, in that time led by Bush, was different from the goals and the strategies of the European Union. The Iraq War divided Europe considerably, and it was a violation of international rules. It was against a vote of the Security Council of the United Nations. It was a unilateral decision of the United States government, supported by the United Kingdom government, by Portugal and Spain, against France and Germany. But one conclusion we took was to suggest in the European Parliament that those member states of the European Union who are at the same time members of NATO should build within NATO, on basis of this common security and defense policy, a European bloc with a known strategy. That was what failed, and I would be happy if we had today such a strategy of the European Union, because I believe honestly that the 5% rule of GDP is a kind of Trump strategy to stick to the Article 5 obligation of the NATO treaty to provide American support only for those countries who spend this 5%. And therefore I think that was the question, what should the European Union do as fast as possible to become independent from the strategies of the United States of America.
Thank you very much. We started with a huge question. Old treaties, new wars, has the European security model failed? And we went even further. I won't try to conclude, just a few things for your wine conversations afterwards. There's probably no new treaty needed, but we need to kind of revitalize, bring new spirit, new ideas into the old treaties. The European security model hasn't failed entirely. It has failed in parts, but there is ample opportunity, there are windows of opportunity to repair that. And we talked about dialogue, we talked about that Moscow shouldn't have the military means to even do more damage. This is something we can do imminently, continue the negotiations. But there's also the idea of kind of reinvigorate the institutional layer we have. We could call it an architecture, we could call it an ecosystem, something that holds things together. But in the end, it comes down to something all of us, every one of us can do. And that was said by James. We should think about how best to organize human society, to make it meaningful and with purpose for our citizens. Because that was the mystery which won the Cold War. We had the better model. We were the best version we could be of ourselves. And with that, I'd like to thank my panel very, very much. It was inspiring. I thank you for the wonderful questions. A huge applause to the panel, and then outside for wine. Thanks a lot.